Where does he come from? He comes from Australia. What does he do? He's an artist. Where does he come from? He comes from Germany. What does he do? He's a chef. Where does he come from? He comes from England. What does he do? He's a barber. Where does she come from? She comes from Italy. What does he do? He's a doctor. Where does he come from? He comes from India. What does he do? He's a farmer. Where does he come from? He comes from Canada. What does he do? He's a banker. Where does he come from? He comes from Holland. What does he do? He's a dentist. Where does he come from? He comes from France. What does he do? He's a carpenter. Where does he come from? He comes from America. What does he do? He's an engineer. Where does he come from? He comes from Switzerland. What does he do? He's a fireman. Where does she come from? She comes from Austria. What does she do? She's a flight attendant. Where does he come from? Where does he come from? He comes from Denmark. What does he do? He's a journalist. Where does she come from? She comes from Finland. What does he do? What does she do? She's a nurse. She's a nurse. Where does he come from? He comes from Korea. What does he do? He's a photographer. Where does she come from? She comes from Belgium. What does she do? She's a housewife. Where does he come from? Where does he come from? He comes from New Zealand. What does he do? He's a teacher. Where does he come from? He comes from Sweden. What does he do? He's a painter. Where does he come from? He comes from India. What does he do? He's a pilot. Where does he come from? He comes from China. What does he do? He's a policeman. He's a policeman. Where does he come from? He comes from France. What does he do? He's a tailor. Where does she come from? She comes from Italy. What does she do? She's a vet. Where does he come from? He's come from Australia. What does he do? He's a soldier. Where does she come from? She comes from America. What does she do? She's a tutor.